All right, well, it's a minute after 2, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for joining the Tube Light Denko Summer Series webinars. We'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce Josh Culverhouse. He's with Orafol. Josh, I'll keep an eye on the question and answer box. I'll
Okay.
let you know if we have any pop in there. I'll keep an eye on people that are coming in late, and I'll get those people admitted to the meeting.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to you, and I'll let you introduce your team.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So, thank you for having me today. And to the point that you just made there, Terry, if you do have questions, please feel free to interrupt me throughout. We do not have to wait till the end. I would like to have I like to answer those questions as they arise, just so they remain relevant to that time in the meeting. So, anyway, I'll get started here. I've got Beth Dillon here as well. She's our Southeastern Regional Manager. My name's Josh Culverhouse, as Terry mentioned. I've been with Orafol since 2007, and I started out in our product support department. And I just want to confirm, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, good. Okay, so as we dive in here, a little side note. In college, I worked for Sherwin-Williams, a large paint manufacturer, and little did I know at that time it would prove to be a very valuable experience, bringing that information and that knowledge of paint coatings to my time here at Orafol since 2007. So you guys will understand why here in a minute. But this is the first time I've given this presentation via webinar. It's very interactive, so please, as Terry mentioned, throw those questions into the chat, and we'll get those addressed for sure. So I'll be explaining throughout this presentation as well some specific examples, real world examples, and a lot of logical explanations and theories as well, behind product selection and paint compatibility, the type of wall you're applying to, just to make sure you guys are more well versed as you're approaching some of these applications out in the real world from your perspective. So again, my email address is on here. I'm an open book. If you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out to me directly or the Orafol product support group or your regional manager. One way or the other, we'll definitely get you guys answers to questions that you have. So we'll jump right in here, and hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties, which everybody typically does have on these webinars. So anyway, here we go. Again, just to kind of reiterate, we're going to help you dial in wall graphic compatibility with today's latex paint technology, debunk some myths, and also provide some more technical details surrounding those applications. We're also going to discuss how to effectively tackle textured wall wrap applications as well. Again, using a lot of real world examples. So, one thing that you should always do is your homework, right? So many of us probably didn't like doing a lot of homework when we were in school, but you know what? We're in the real world, and we need to make educated decisions because, a lot of these projects are thousands of dollars, multi thousands of dollars for these your customers, I should say, and for you as well in terms of tackling some of these applications. So we want to make sure that you're well versed in the products that you're using and if they're appropriate for the application. Okay, so we've spent a lot of years dialing in our product selection tools where we're to the point now, this is going to sound a little arrogant, that we feel like we have the best product selection tools in the industry from a vinyl manufacturer standpoint. And we really tee it up based on the application. Instead of product first, we're looking at the application first, and then we'll fit the product. And within that logic, we're looking at helping you guys even further understand from a basic sense whether it's a good product, a better product, or the best product for that application. So you're looking at one end, the minimum viable product, and at the other end, the best product for that application. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about, you know, hitting those mosquitoes with fly swatters versus aiming at those mosquitoes with bazookas. Okay, so bear with me. I'll clarify that here in a minute. But we don't ever want you to overuse a product that's way overkill for an application. We want to make sure you're using the right product for the application, and that'll save you thousands. And those compounding savings over time will hopefully lead to maybe new equipment purchases, hiring more people, etc. So we'll explain throughout this presentation, ways that, just responsible decision making and purchasing can lead to a lot of savings and increased capital investments on your end. So peeling back the layers here, here's just a quick synopsis of what our literature looks like. It's very simplified, where we have everything broken down by the application first, and then here's an example on the screen of the good, better, best, and that gives you a good starting point. So when you are talking with a distributor rep here at TubeLight or Denko, you guys can be on the same sheet of music and kind of diagnosing whatever application you might have, right? So you're looking here on the left-hand side, we've got it broken down by permanent wall graphics. On the right-hand side here, we've got removable wall graphics. This is just one example of hundreds of different applications in that inkjet media guide that I just shared with you. And we'll get a digital copy of this to everybody that's here. Tara and her team, from TubeLight Denko will share all these resources with you guys after this webinar. So that way you're not out to sea without a paddle, right? So anyway, when you're looking at this information, though, you're looking at the product mix on the left in terms of what we recommend for these applications. And over on the right-hand side where it says recommended laminate, the bold laminate is your primary, kind of your first choice. And then the other laminates that are not bold are also compatible. So as you've all faced over the last few years, some supply chain constraints, those have hit you guys pretty hard, just like they have us. So we want to make sure that you have all the tools necessary to find an alternate product if that does not sit on that local TubeLight Denko shelf, right? So maybe there's an alternate product that's available. So again, this is high level, but we're going to get really technical here in a little bit, but I promise you it'll be digestible and very understandable and relatable. So some of the other resources in this guide, we talk about paint formulation changes, and I'm going to get into that here in a minute. But there's a lot of heads up and technical information, things you should know, scattered throughout this guide, as well as QR codes directly to videos on how-tos, tutorials, etc. We also have textured wall wrap resources as well, which we'll get into. But this just kind of gives you an overall understanding of what this guide looks like. It maybe look intimidating, at first glance, but when you look through here, you'll see how actually simplified this is compared to other resources out there that leave a lot to be desired. Another thing that you guys have access to is we have a very robust sampling program. So if you need to qualify a product for a specific project, we have those resources available for you. So these printed laminated samples are great. They're palatable sizes, and you can go apply it, test that adhesive on the wall. You can see how beautifully it prints. You can check laminate sheen. You can check white point on the film. So those printed laminated pieces that are available across the board and a lot of our products, those are very handy. We have poster size graphics as well, so you can test larger surface areas, sample rolls, Even if you're down into the plotter film side, like our 631 series, for like wall lettering, things like that, we can get you color swatches that are a little larger than what you see in the color chart. And that provides you with a little bit larger swatch to present to your customer for them to pick between one of those yellows or reds or blues. So before we get technical, though, I want to share a creative project with you, and I want to share some information with you as well, for you guys to potentially find additional revenue sources, right? So, when you guys are out and about and you're trying to sell and you're trying to find projects, I want you to write this down, or maybe Terry, you can put this in the chat, but visit segd.org. Beth, Dylan, you can put that in the chat if you want as well. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But segd.org, it's a group of architects and experiential and environmental graphic designers that, they're very creative, but they don't have the equipment or the application skills that you guys have that are on this call today. And they look to folks like you to partner with on some really high-end projects, right? So they have local chapters. SEGD is a small extension of like the International Sign Association. So they're a very credible group, and they do have kind of regionalized chapters where you can network. It's kind of like a chamber of commerce for designers and solutions partners. And that's what they call you guys, as solutions partners. And, so if you can, visit segd.org, and that's Sam Echo Gus design.org. Sorry, I don't know all my letters there. So anyway,
I put it in the chat window for you, Josh.
Yeah, there you go. So I appreciate that. But yeah, if you guys can, that's a good way to network and find opportunities to, fill some of your additional capacity, and if you have available time and resources, and you'll get to work on some really cool projects. So they're always looking for good shops to work with. Definitely recommend that. But here's an example of a multimedia designer where they work through experiential design. So they're bringing in digital assets, they're bringing in three-dimensional assets, and they're bringing in static assets, as backdrops. And there's a video. I'm not going to try to play it through this webinar right now, but I will send you the link. It's a minute long. It's really cool. So Friend Design, they partnered with the Kennekill Group, and they did a interactive pediatric playroom at the University of Virginia Children's Hospital. So it's a therapy room, and they intertwined all three of those things. So digital, three-dimensional, and then static, we'll say backdrop graphics. Okay, so here's some examples of what they did. And I want to kind of give a pat on the back to our product support team who helped with this project. And the way they helped is the Kennekill Group approached our team at Orafol with this project, and they said, hey, we've got a multitude of surfaces that we have to apply graphics to. We are going to literally wrap everything floor to ceiling. And obviously, not everything is one size fits all when it comes to a lot of these graphics. So I'll make this short and sweet here, but the video will do a good job of explaining things and showing you guys more in depth on how this all worked together. But here's some screenshots from the video. So they had ceiling tiles, okay? And, eventually, they will probably redo this room. Okay, so if you've ever tried or handled a ceiling tile, one thing you realize is they're very porous and they're very lightweight and they're pretty fragile. But they wanted a fighter's chance eventually to be able to remove the applied graphics from the ceiling tiles. But if they weren't able to, it's not the end of the world, right? So they needed a removable solution that would adhere to those ceiling tiles. And then, and I'm going to go around the robin here, around the circle here, excuse me, and kind of explain all these things and how they all tie together. So you have the floor graphics as well. So they needed an anti-skid laminate. And we all know that anti-skid laminates eventually wear smooth. If you didn't know that, now you do. And eventually those floor graphics will need to be replaced. So we went with a removable base media on the floor graphics with a anti-skid textured over laminate on top. And then on the wall graphics, they needed something removable as well. Again, a lot of folks will use like vehicle wrap films to wrap walls with. And that's where I brought up the shooting mosquitoes with bazookas versus swatting a mosquito with a fly swatter, right? So, you don't need to use vehicle wrap films on wall murals. You are throwing money down the toilet, okay? If I'm being blunt. The other application, we'll get more into that here in a minute, but it's one of my biggest pet peeves. The other application here was windows. So here's one thing you should write down if you do a lot of architectural graphics. If you take a clear print media and you apply a matte finish laminate over it, it creates a very foggy appearance. That's not always desired, but in this case it was. So those areas where the trees are on the bottom left-hand image, that was a wall of windows, and they wanted it to look like a foggy nature scene. So the areas where there's no print, where it looks foggy, there's literally no print there. Okay, the only areas in that image that have print are those trees and those bushes. Okay, so you can create some very unique effects by playing and mixing and matching different materials together. And when you use a matte finish laminate by itself on glass, that's another cool effect where maybe they don't like the silver appearance of like an etched glass material, but they still want some kind of, subtle accent on that window. Just use straight matte finish clear film, whether it's laminate or matte finish clear vinyl, print film or plotter film. It gives a really cool, delicate, kind of interesting look that's not silver metallic. Okay, so like a etched glass would be. Again, I'll send you guys the video of this, but it ties in digital screens and the kids playing and interacting in this space. But you see all the three-dimensional features like the tree. You'll see some other three-dimensional objects when I send you guys the video. But I don't have a whole lot of time on today's webinar, so I needed to shorten a few things up. And that was one of the casualties, was that video. So, but we will get that to you. So now we're going to peel back the layer again, and we're going to get a little technical. So we're going to talk about paint formulation changes. Okay, so many years ago, probably I'd say eight to 10 years ago now, the paint industry really threw a monkey wrench at the graphics industry. It's when Fathead was at its all-time, in terms of popularity. Those Fathead, those print and cut sports figure images, those were printed on a 6 mil ultra removable or movable or changeable adhesive product that had water-based adhesive. Okay, it really like those old school paints that smelled really bad when they were going on, and it's kind of like a magnet, right? So opposites attract. So positive, negative, and a magnet attract. So the water-based adhesive, really like those smelly VOC paints that we all grew up with. Okay, but like I said, about 8 to 10 years ago, all these graphics started falling on the floor. And initially we were like, well, when was the wall painted? Well, the wall was painted a year ago. So that, removes the outgassing from the equation. And we realized that, companies like Sherwin-Williams and Behr and Valspar and PPG and all these different paint conglomerates were going green, right? And from that first comment I made when we hopped on this webinar, my time at Sherwin-Williams was very valuable because I saw this coming, and it cued me to question the paint coatings because, I had just bought my first house and I was painting my bedrooms throughout the house, and I saw the labels were now, the everyday option where they say zero VOC or low VOC. So the paint companies took all the volatile organic compounds and removed them from the paint. Kind of like in our industry, you had your true solvent printers like the old HP 8000 to 9000 printers, the Seiko color painters back in the day, the Mamaki JV5 with the hard solvent inks, but those dried really fast because they had all those smelly drying solvents in those inks. And now today we have eco solvent inks. They took all those smelly solvents out, easier to breathe. You don't have to ventilate. So that was the paint company's logic where they removed all those VOCs from the paint. So, now just a few years ago, they added another wrench to the equation, and they're making these paints more durable. And when I say more durable, these paints now, if you go into your local paint store, you're going to see descriptives on these paints that say, dirt or moisture resistance or abrasion resistant, washable, scrubbable, etc. So they've added additives into these paints: silicone, Teflon, ceramic, other synthetic components. Well, while those are all great and make the paint fantastic in terms of durability and resistance to all these things, consequently, it's made the graphic marking films that we're applying to them in terms of wall murals and spot graphics more difficult in terms of adhesion. So that's an issue, right? So how do we overcome that issue? Okay, so when you are working on a project and you are in the early phases of kind of your discovery process that you're going through with your customer, you want to perform a site survey. Okay, is that always feasible? No. But if they're local, you really need to get over there and actually review the site, not just for the paint and these, kind of higher level pieces, but you're going to have to measure the walls. You're going to have to plot out and figure out where all the graphics are going. So it's good practice to perform a site survey, and we're going to peel back the layers here and kind of explain what should be done and reviewed and inspected throughout this site survey. So obviously in your initial discussion, you want to get this information as soon as possible, even before you quote the job, but just find out, hey, when was the wall last painted? Okay. It should have been at least 3 weeks ago or prior to the start of the project. That way, if it's freshly painted, it has enough time to cure and outgas. Okay. The other thing is try to find out what type of paint it is. They're not always going to know that right off the top of their head, but I'm going to give you some information here to help you in a minute. So just bear with me. But if they don't, try to see if you can get in touch, or if they can get in touch with whoever that maintenance or facility manager is that may know what paint is on that commercial wall. So again, and then once you find out what kind of paint that was, you're going to then research that paint. Does it have any of these attributes listed? Zero VOC, washable, scrubbable, stain blocking, anti-scuff, abrasion resistant. Those are all things that could cause compatibility issues, right? So, rewinding in this conversation, we were talking about, everything was humming along just fine with all the economical solutions there were for removable wall graphics, and then they all started failing, and hence the popularity of fatheads went way down. And people were scrambling on, hey, what's going on? Everybody wanted to look at the vinyl manufacturers and start blaming us for something we changed, but that wasn't the case. So, with that being said, we looked at our stable of products, and we looked for solutions before we started trying to reinvent the wheel. So we went into our facility and started painting our walls at Orafol with all these different types of paints. And we were able to uncover that the compatibility issues lied in some of the components, in these paints that were no longer there, hence the VOCs. So, we've worked on, some solutions. We already had products in our portfolio that actually worked great on these, slightly higher in terms of an investment in material, but not to the point where some of our competitors were saying, just use vehicle wrap film, it sticks fine. Okay. Again, no more bazookas with flies, right? So you guys are going to want to do compatibility testing whenever possible. And these site surveys are mission critical. So I have an example. So I always relay everything to food. So anybody on this call that knows me, I talk about food a lot. But if you're a Krispy Kreme donut fan, Krispy Kreme is located in Charlotte, North Carolina, in terms of one of their corporate offices. And they bought 100-plus-year-old red brick industrial building, and they were going to restore it and apply graphics throughout. So they're applying graphics to the textured brick surface that's 100 plus years old. They're applying graphics to freshly built office space, throughout. And of course, paint is one of the last things to be done, especially the final coat after construction. So the sign company, we'll just generically call it the sign company, that reached out to us and said, hey, we've got a rush project. We've got to wrap a bunch of walls in the brand new Krispy Kreme headquarters. And we're said, oh, okay, that sounds cool. All these donut patterned wallpapers. And, they said, but wait, it was just painted like 3 days ago, and their grand opening is in another 3 days. So we've got to get in and out of there immediately. And we said, well, what kind of paint was it? They told us what kind of paint it was. And we said, look, whatever you put up on that wall is most likely going to fall down within, either by the time you're finished with the other end of that wall, the first couple panels will probably start falling on the floor, potentially, because that's how fresh the paint was. So they said, well, what do you have that's bulletproof? I say air quotes, bulletproof. And we said, well, you'll probably have to go with a high-tech adhesive, something designed for low surface energy plastics that have a lot of static on it and resist a lot of things, right? Chemicals, adhesives, etc. And so that's what they did. They had to go with a high-tech solution. So another variable here is, like, if you guys remember the Extreme Home Makeover, we partnered with them on a project where they were building a new house. And if you recall that TV show, they built those houses in like 1 week. So you can imagine how the chaos is throughout those projects. And it's being filmed, it's on national TV. And there was one episode that we partnered with them on where the kids and the family were getting Disney themed wallpaper applications throughout their bedrooms. And we knew what would happen because the walls would have been painted, and then they're applying the wallpaper, the wall murals, shortly thereafter. So for filming purposes, we said, the sign company that worked with us on this project, we said, look, print 2 sets. And the first set, you're going to apply it. Here's what's going to happen. It's going to fall on the floor. And then keep that backup set for a month or 2 later, where you can go back into that house after filming. Everything's settled, everything's cured, and you can go give those kids, those new wall murals, and they'll actually stick to the wall. And that's exactly what happened. Those wall murals started falling onto the floor. We knew that was going to happen because that paint was so fresh, right? So there's different variables that can cause compatibility issues. And if you ever have run into an issue, and again, when I'm in a room full of people giving this specific talk, I'll always have people raise their hand. Has anybody had wall graphics just fall on the floor the very next day? So one variable is either paint outgassing, where the paint is so fresh, it's pushing the vinyl off the wall, or it's a compatibility issue where it's applied to, something like this, where it's a zero VOC paint, washable, scrubbable, stain blocking, etc. So now we're going to get into how to overcome that and compatibility testing that we've done that we want to share with you guys. So in terms of your site survey, we have a practical information guide, processing and handling of Orajet wall graphic applications. In there, we have material specs and popular contractor grade / DIY paints from Sherwin-Williams. We talk about the adhesive properties and whether they're compatible and whatnot. So there's a checklist throughout here. And we'll get into that now. So things you need to identify during a site survey. Okay, we've already talked about identifying the paint brand, the series, the sheen. Ideally, you're applying to at least an eggshell or satin finish. Flat finishes are typically a little hairy. They tend to absorb a lot of the moisture and the chemical components from the adhesive, and removals are always a bear. Okay, so obviously find out when the wall was painted. Is it a heavier texture, semi-smooth, meaning like a standard roller stipple, like an orange peel, versus a manufactured texture? Visual inspection. Obviously there's typical problem areas where there's a poor paint bond. So one example here is the Atlanta Braves spring training facility in Florida. This project was done a few years ago, and the installer did a flashlight test up on the perimeter of the ceiling, and he saw where the painter had cut corners where they didn't put as much paint up, on that top, we'll say 4 inches of the wall. We're talking 15 feet up in the air. And, these are going to be full coverage wall murals in their pro shop or their fan shop where people go buy, gear. So, what happened was, he called that out on the checklist. So he could tell his customer saying, hey, we're going to have some adhesion issues here. Or when we go to remove this might be an area where the graphic might pull some of the paint off because it wasn't completely uniform across the top edge of the ceiling where they cut in with their brush. Okay, so those are things that you need to understand, that if you have any potential objections that you want to discuss with your client, it's just like a vehicle inspection report. If you're doing a vehicle wrap, you're going to do the same thing on the wall. You're going to circle where all the outlet covers are, because during removal, you might have some issues where some of the paint comes off around outlets and light switches and, fire alarms and air ducts and things like that. Are there a lot of HVAC vents where there's returns and blowers, in that area, collecting a lot of dust, blowing a lot of air, maybe right on a seam? Those are potential issue area or problem areas. You'll want to identify if it's the inside of an exterior wall, and maybe that wall wasn't properly insulated. So that wall is getting much colder than all the other interior walls. So maybe you might have some adhesion issues if you're doing an install in Sheboygan, Wisconsin in the middle of the winter, or Indianapolis, Indiana in the spring or the fall, where we have our heat on in the morning and our AC on in the afternoon, right? So those are things that you want to discuss with your client. Okay, high humidity areas. There's a lot more athletic centers that are being outfitted with really cool graphics, even down to the high school and middle school level. Those gymnasiums and those athletic facilities are starting to rival college and professional facilities. So there's a lot of opportunities out here, but these are all things that we need to be aware of, before we tackle a project blindly without having some of these questions in your head and a checklist to go through. One thing existing wallpaper. Maybe you have to apply over some textured wallpaper, things like that, right? So obstruction, smoke detectors, outlet switches, that'll add to your install time, right? Just like door handles or some unique feature on a vehicle, that's going to add, or maybe you're doing door jams on a vehicle. So things like that you find that parallel on a wall graphic project, that could be obstructions that could delay or slow you down during your install. Okay, so these are all things that you need to consider. But how do you troubleshoot some of those areas where you still have to do the job, right? So you have some of these question marks. You still have to do that job. Whenever you go do a wall mural application where you're doing full coverage, okay, have a roll of banner tape with you. Okay, I know that sounds crazy, but at the top edge of that Atlanta Braves pro shop or facility, excuse me, or that store, he ran a bead of banner tape because he knew he could potentially have adhesion issues. And he told the customer first, like, hey, I'm going to put some reinforcement up here. Banner tape works great. I've even seen people use staples because they barely appear, especially in a photographic type image. They're low profile, and something as simple as a staple will help that hold in that area, or running a bead of caulk at the top edge or around the perimeter, even down by the floor where maybe it's getting hit by a mop or a floor scrubber or brooms or whatever, or it's a high traffic area. Those types of things, having a tube of caulking, a roll of banner tape, a stapler, those are troubleshooting scenarios where we are human. We are not perfect, nor can we have a perfect install or perfect variables every time we do a job. So you have to adapt and overcome, right? We've all heard that throughout our lives, adapt and overcome. So those are ways you do that. The other thing that you need to understand and have your customer sign off on is you have no control specifically over how well that wall was painted, and between the paint bond, if it was primed properly, and then that drywall, for example, you don't know what the integrity is, right, between the paint bond to that wall. So write this down. You can never, as a vinyl applicator, production service provider, whatever you want to call yourself, you can never guarantee the paint to surface bond on any project you do, whether it's an automobile or whether it's a painted wall that you're applying graphics to. Any coated surface, you have no guarantee, you cannot guarantee a clean removal, no matter what. So make sure that your customer knows, hey, they're paying you to apply those graphics to that surface, whether it's an automobile or a painted wall, and that you are not responsible. Tube Light Denko is not responsible. Orafol or whatever your preferred vinyl manufacturer is not responsible for any damage to that surface, because, again, we will give you products and solutions that will minimize the potential problem when it comes to repositioning or removing, that will give you the best possible outcome. But again, you can't guarantee clean removal from every application, even on a latex painted wall with, ultra removable adhesive. There's just always those variables where maybe that wall was patched, there's spackle, and then they primed and painted, and maybe there was some drywall dust left in that paint while it was curing. So there's a poor bond in that specific area where they patched that nail hole or that drywall repair. Okay, so keep those things in mind. Have some kind of liability waiver available for your customers to review and sign before you begin on that project. So again, peeling back the onion here a little more, there's different adhesive variables that you can consider for a multitude of applications. Here's the basics. So you have removable adhesive, okay? And those typically should remove cleanly within 2 to 3 years after application. They have a really slow acclimation period. So after that 2 to 3 year mark, the product starts to become more permanent. So a lot of people think removable adhesive products will potentially just fall off. Well, they'll fall off if they're not compatible, but they're not just going to fall off, excuse me, the surface just because they're removable. Okay. That's typically lies more with just a compatibility issue, not a product performance issue. Actually, removable adhesives become more permanent over time. So, with that in mind, you want to give your customers a fighter's chance, excuse me, of potentially getting that graphic off cleanly. So a lot of folks, again, use vehicle wrap films when they shouldn't be for a project. Maybe that tenant is leasing that space and they're having their wall wrapped. Do you think that tenant will want something that they could potentially get off in 2 to 3 years cleanly with minimal damage, maybe with just some paint touch up? Or do you think they're going to want a permanent adhesive vehicle wrap film, and even vehicle wrap films that are designed to remove cleanly from automobile paint do not remove cleanly from latex paint, two totally different paint technologies. So keep that in mind when you're, potentially destroying a customer's wall by putting vehicle wrap film or permanent adhesive vinyl on their wall. That does not mean that it's going to bond any better initially. It is a way that people have overcome those variables of the low VOC situation, but it's not necessary, and I'm going to get into that. So give your customers the opportunity that if they want to change their branding or if they have to move out, that you're giving them a product that's removable. Okay. And I'm going to give you a solution here in a minute. And I'll jump through these next two pretty quickly. But permanent adhesive products I already touched on. Typically, a vehicle wrap film or just a permanent sign vinyl will really bond hard to that paint and create such a bond to that paint where removal is probably 90% of the time going to damage the wall. Okay.
Hey,
And
Josh,
then yeah, go ahead.
can I interrupt you real quick? We do have a question.
Yeah.
And I think we may have touched on this earlier, but the question is there a general timeline guide for newly painted walls telling how long to wait after painting for certain paints? Isn't it normally 3 weeks minimum?
Yeah, 3 weeks minimum is a good bet. And then at that point, you should take a swatch of the material you intend to use and have like 2 or 3 swatches and test that swatch on 3 different walls. Even though they were all painted at the same time, most likely, and with the same paint, there could be a variable that just isn't understood by just looking at it, right? So, and I'm going to jump into that here a little more in depth on my next slide. So,
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Thanks.
So, anyway, and then high-tech adhesive. I brought up that Krispy Kreme project where they painted it 3 days prior. They needed something that was going to stick and stick hard. They're a large corporation. They don't care if they have to replace that wall down the road. They have plenty of money. They can handle that. But not every project is going to be that nice to you in terms of, or that mean or nice to you in terms of the back end of having to remove it without damaging the wall. They don't care, right? So I'm going to show you some videos here of what you can expect on the removal of some of these films, right? So here's an example of a vehicle wrap film on a eggshell painted wall. So the wall paint is an eggshell finish, so very similar to a satin. And it is a 0 VOC paint, okay? And it's actually a washable, scrubbable paint as well, okay? So here's what happens when you try to remove a permanent adhesive product from a painted wall. Okay, so you may try to use a little bit of heat, but when you use heat on latex paint, you're activating a lot of the colorant or the pigment in that paint, and you're reactivating some of the properties of that paint while you're trying to soften the adhesive. So again, keep in mind, you're going to get a lot of damage to the wall paint, potentially down to the fibers of the paper on the top of the drywall. Okay. So keep that in mind, that you're going to experience paint damage when you put permanent adhesives on a latex painted wall. So we're going to give you some examples of compatible removable products that should work instead, right? So instead of using that high-end vehicle wrap film that costs you, we'll say $500 to $700 a roll, depending on the material, here's some alternatives. So this is Promar 400. This is the, we'll say, economy grade, contractor grade paint for Sherwin-Williams. It's probably the second most popular paint in their arsenal in any commercial job you go do. In a fast food restaurant, a shopping mall, an airport, a school building, etc. Chances are it's either this paint or the one I'm about to show you here in a second. But these two products right here, Orajet 3621 and Orajet 3169 RA, these are very compatible with this paint. I've paired the proper laminates with these below in the blue boxes, but we have validated that, you know, if that paint has been properly applied and cured, these two digital print medias will adhere to this paint and actually offer you a very, very high fighter's chance of clean removal with minimal to no damage to the wall. So quick specs, indoor durability is what I want to highlight here. When you're looking at durability for an interior application, you know, it's really indefinite because it's not getting weathered. It's not getting a whole lot of UV exposure because the windows and the walls are protecting it. It's typically in a climate controlled environment. So when you're looking at durability on interior applications, it's really a moot point. Okay, so keep that in mind. So here's the most popular paint that you would run into in any commercial type space, like I said, or a school, an airport, a shopping mall, restaurants, etc., museums, is Promar 200. And then the DIY alternative to that Promar 200 is Super Paint. So when you guys are working on with your customers, you know, and they say Promar 200, again, I know this is a little technical, but we're going to share this slide deck with you. This is listed in our practical information guide that we'll also share with you, but this is good information to know. So these two products listed here both have a solvent-based removable adhesive. So I had 3169 RA as the better option on the Promar 400. So the difference between these two products, 3621 and 3169, 3621 has a water-based adhesive, 3169 RA has a solvent-based adhesive, but they're both removable. Okay, so they have the best chance to not destroying that customer's wall. Okay, but wait, there's more. Sherwin-Williams threw another wrench at us. So they took their most popular contractor grade paint and added an HP clarifier to it, high performance. So it's a abrasion resistant, washable, scrubbable, higher end contractor grade paint. So what adheres to those, right? So those are things that we need to answer for you guys here on today's meeting. But wait, before we get there, we do need to talk a little bit about a good multi-purpose product for you guys to consider. So if you're doing a lot of window, wall, and floor applications, or you're giving customers graphics to apply, chances are they're going to want the AirGress technology to make things bubble free. They're also going to want something that has a lightly gray tinted pigmented adhesive to block out any, you know, dark contrasting colors that might appear through the graphic, especially if the graphic's predominantly white. Or, you know, they want something that will remove cleanly from most surfaces. And, you know, this product right here, the 3169 RA, is a fantastic product. If you guys have ever used our Orajet 3165 or 3165 RA, it's a very popular permanent adhesive signage and graphics material. This is the, we'll say, brother or sister product to that product. So it's the same face film, same print profiles. It just offers the removable adhesive. And then 3691 is the removable version of our very popular 3651. Okay, so for those of you that really like the 3651 film, this is the removable option for that. So now we're going to show you guys, how cleanly these removable adhesive products remove from these latex painted walls. So this is a solvent-based removable adhesive. There's a nice healthy resistance. Okay. And you'll typically, when you go apply these swatches on your customers' walls, you only need something so big. You don't need a whole test kit. You just need to apply it to the wall, go do your measurements, come back 20, 30 minutes later, and that adhesive will have enough time to bond and show you what it'll do for you and your customer when you apply the full project. So if there's a nice healthy resistance on that pole, and it's anchored to that latex painted wall, you're good. But if you hear a very high-pitched crackly noise, like if you're trying to apply like tin foil to a wall, kind of imagine what that would sound like, that little chatter sound that aluminum foil makes. If that wall is painted with a scrubbable, washable paint, water-based adhesive products will sound like that on those types of paints. So going with a solvent-based removable adhesive product like this, chances are you'll have some solid adhesion there. So now we get into those really hyper durable, washable, scrubbable, abrasion resistant type paints that you get, at Sherwin-Williams. If you walk into their store, these are their like premium solutions. They're fantastic paints if you're wanting to paint your house or your business with a washable, scrubbable paint. But again, you get into some adhesion issues. So 3105 HT, 3954, some of those higher tech applications, these graphic solutions will anchor to any of these paints without issue. But again, this is where you really want to express that, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, chances are when you guys go to remove this, it's going to damage your wall. Okay. They need to know that. They need to sign off on that, and you need to cover your, what. So, but these products are proven to adhere to these premium washable, scrubbable paints. So, but you guys need to see for yourselves what actually happens when you apply high-tech adhesive products to these latex painted walls. And again, this is actually on a washable, scrubbable duration Sherwin-Williams paint. So check this out. You guys are going to be floored when you see this. Boom. All right. So that gets way worse. So just FYI, when you put high-tech adhesive products on, various random paints, whether you know it or you don't know it, this is probably what's going to happen on the removal. It'll actually get as worse or get as bad as getting down to the like aggregate inside or underneath the paper of the drywall. All right, so what if you don't know what type of paint it is? You've done your compatibility testing and it shows that, okay, my standard solution, if there is one, of 3169 or 3621 is not anchoring to this wall very well. Chances are it's probably that washable, scrubbable, or hard to stick paint, right? Scuff resistance, etc. Things that are in there like silicone and Teflon, ceramic additives in those paints that are designed to repel. So, now you need to, again, readdress this with your customer. Hey, my standard solutions aren't adhering or anchoring to this wall very well, so we're going to have to go with a high-tech solution. Do you still want to proceed? You don't want to scare them out of the project, but just say, hey, look, here's the variable, or we can do something else, okay? So I'm going to give you some troubleshooting solutions if your customer's willing to accommodate these requests, okay? So I'm going to jump past this video and I want to go back and forth here for a second. So one thing we get asked a lot, some of you guys may have done this, but is it okay to apply wall wraps over primer, okay? The two most popular primers out there are Kills or Zinsser, okay? Yes, it is actually okay to apply graphics directly over just plain primer. So, and the outgassing time isn't near as long. So if you know that that wall is a questionable paint, or maybe it's as extreme as like um, a hyper resistant like marine coating for some reason that they applied on that door or that wall, simply go over, apply a bonding primer to it, and wait about 3 to 4 days, and you'll get adhesion with a normal, everyday, removable wall graphic film. Okay. But again, you still can't guarantee removal, but keep in mind, at least you'll get good adhesion. Okay. So the next thing you could try, again, I wouldn't advise this if they plan to make this, or if this graphic is temporary, because this next thing I'm about to tell you, and you can read on the screen while I'm explaining this, but if you're not doing full coverage, and this is like a print and cut graphic that you're applying onto a painted wall that say is like navy blue, or burgundy or dark, we'll just say a dark color. If you wipe that wall down with isopropyl alcohol, you are going to pull pigment out of that paint and you're going to have streaks and discoloration all over that wall. But what you've done is you've made it compatible with the print material. Okay, so that wall now, you've wiped off those washable, scrubbable components. You've tacked up that paint and it's ready for application. Okay, I always recommend cutting alcohol with water, 50-50, 60-40, somewhere in there is a good rule of thumb, just to cut down some of that alcohol. It dries quickly, so waiting 20-30 minutes after you've wiped the walls down with isopropyl rubbing alcohol and a water mixture, you should be ready to rock and roll. Have some swatches with you, okay? Before you go wrap that entire room or whatever that scenario is, take a swatch, apply it to the wall after you've done that, of the material you're using, and making sure that, okay, we're good. That way, before you go waste all those graphics, that wall is dried out enough from that wipe down that you're good to go. Okay, so keep those things in mind. So again, I want to set expectations with you guys, making sure you're setting expectations with your customers, but never promise a client that their graphics won't damage the wall. Okay, set those expectations. When you're applying those graphics to a painted surface, there's always a risk that some damage may occur. And, you're the professional, right? So they're trusting you, just like you trust your HVAC person or your plumber, that they're going to do the job right in your house or your place of business. You're the graphics professional. So you guys are continuing your education on this webinar right now, and I applaud all of you for that. But you're the professional. You have to be their guide, to help them make the best decision for their particular project. Okay. So keeping these things in mind, you'll always have a good compass in completing successful projects because you're going to do your homework, right? And you're going to use the tools that folks like us and Tube Light Denko are providing you. So just keep those things in mind and you guys will be good. So if you want to stick around for 10 more minutes, I'm going to get into textured surface applications, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end if you'd like. So if anybody has done any textured surface applications, they're actually quite fun and they're very interesting. But these are the typical surfaces: brick, cinder block, poured concrete, stucco, stone, etc. So those of you that are located in the Southeast United States, this lighthouse on these images might look very familiar. This is in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and their marina there. and in Harbortown. And the PGA Tour has a tournament there every year, the week after the Masters. If you're a golf nut like me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For their 50th anniversary, they wanted to wrap this lighthouse in plaid. So the Masters champion gets a green jacket. The Harbortown Heritage winner gets a plaid jacket. So they wrapped all the red stripes on this lighthouse that has this textured marine coating on it with plaid. The idea was to leave this up for about 3 months, a month and a half prior to the tournament and a month and a half post tournament, and then they would go remove it. Well, that never goes as planned. And they left the graphics up for 3 years. And during that time, a tropical storm hit it and a hurricane hit it. And I happened to live near there, or used to. And so I was able to go check it out because I was curious how it held up. And it was looking like it was brand new. It wasn't phased. After that hurricane, maybe about 6 months later, they went to go remove all these graphics, and it removed cleanly from that marine coating. It did not peel the paint, and because it's an epoxy system, so it's much harder, more durable. But this high-tack textured surface wall wrap film, which we'll get into the specs here in a second, did very well on this application, and it did exactly what they had hoped for a longer term duration than what they had planned for. So the product's called Orajet 3954. It uses our 3951 face film, so our premium face film. So the film by itself, just white, is a 10-year film. We have a conservative durability rating on it because it's going on so many different textured, sometimes uncoated, very porous surfaces. We'll guarantee it for 5. We have applications out there that are, 6, 7, 8 years old now that are still doing just fine. So keep that in mind, that it's not just going to fail at 5 years, but that's a conservative, realistic number in terms of maybe uncoated, unpainted, textured surfaces like brick or block. So here's another really cool application. This is smooth poured concrete in a semi-open concourse in Florida, TIAA Bank Field in Jacksonville. This customer, Signs Plus out of Jacksonville, Florida, was brokered to do some of the graphics throughout the concourse at the stadium. And, from a design standpoint, White Claw being the sponsor, they wanted their cans to really pop, and they wanted them to look like cans. So they went with a gloss Oragard 290 laminate on the cans on these pillars. And then everywhere else where they did the wood cladding on the concrete, above the can and across that crossbeam, they used the matte finish 290 laminate to give it that distressed wood look, and to do the other printed areas. So keep that in mind when you guys are selecting products, that you can make things a little more interesting by mixing and matching laminates throughout your project, or adding plotter film overlays or reflective overlays or things like that, just to make things a little more interesting. On painted poured concrete walls, this is where you could and probably should go with a vehicle wrap type film. This is the inside of an exterior wall. And they did a wall mural in here, and that wall gets very cold. It goes through a lot of temperature fluctuations. So maybe the water-based economical wall graphic film isn't ideal. So going with something that can handle more temperature fluctuation, that's probably a better idea. So our Orajet 3551 or our 3551RA, really good solutions for smooth, painted, poured concrete walls that are often going through a lot of temperature fluctuation because there's no insulation. And then, what we most commonly face is, in these college and high school arenas and athletic facilities, are stacked concrete cinder block. Most often they're painted. So this is another variable where you need something very conformable, and you also need to discuss with your client that chances are on removal, you're probably going to damage the paint unless it's like a high gloss. And then it's less likely, but still likely. In this case, it was like a satin finish on the cinder block, and they used our 3951. You don't really need air egress on cinder block walls just because of the stipple and the texture in the paint. It's not really necessary because there's kind of built-in air egress with all those imperfections in the surface, allowing air to move through there, as well as those grout lines, right? So you could also use our higher end 3954 if you want to keep one product in stock for these types of applications. Go with the product that's more multi-purpose. 3954 is great for uncoated, unpainted surfaces as well as painted texture surfaces. So that is it. And I am happy to answer any questions you guys might have. I always enjoy giving this talk. The feedback I get is, typically well received in terms of somebody learns something that they can take and move forward with and keep that in mind as they do these future projects.
There was a couple questions, Josh. One I answered because it was before you got into the brick applications. They asked about if it was a drywall or concrete, and it was a drywall, so I answered that one.
Okay.
The other question that came in was, what about applying to EIFS siding? And I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am not. You stumped me today. EIFS siding. Is that like hardy plank?
I believe it is.
Okay, yeah. So no, that is typically painted as well. And that is a textured, we'll say, as far as I know, it's like a cement board. And yeah, that shouldn't be an issue because it's adhering to a exterior, typically latex painted surface. And because it's textured to mimic siding, you would use a heat resistant foam roller with your heat gun and your, heating and following it with your roller, doing, typically 12-inch by 12-inch, 10-inch by 10-inch sections, and then working your way around. But typically when you apply onto a textured surface, you're applying it in a way that you are applying it like you would a normal wall mural. You're getting the peaks installed first and flat and smoothed out. And then you're going over with your heat and you're conforming it into the texture and burnishing it in with that heat resistant foam roller. I know like Yellow Tools, Geek Wraps, Rolly Pro, they all make or offer heat resistant foam rollers that won't melt with the amount of heat you're using. Heat guns, typically you want to have your heat gun set to from 800 to 1100 degrees. So your more premium heat guns are what you want to use here, because you're essentially spot melting that film into that surface and that roller is pushing it in. So that's kind of how you handle those applications. And we have videos on showing you how to do that. And again, I'll put a link list together with all the things we discussed today, and it'll have a lot of tutorials and how-to videos and getting a little deeper than we got today.
Okay. Yeah, and if you send that to Tara, she'll make sure she gets it out to everybody that joined today.
Perfect.
Another question came in. I don't know exactly. The question just says 3951 HT versus just 3951.
Okay. So I'm going to take it a step further and say 3954 as well. So I'm going to kind of use my hands as a visual on the screen here. So if you're watching the screen, so in terms of tack level, well, first I'm going to say all three of those films have the exact same face film. So the print surface is identical on all three of those films. Okay. So now let's break it apart in terms of differentiating them. So in terms of adhesive tack level, okay. So regular 3951 would be here. Okay. 3954 would be here. And then 3951 HT would be here. And the reason we have 3951 HT is instead of just 3954 or 3951 HT, 3951 HT has a much higher coat weight of adhesive. And that product is designed specifically for like low surface energy plastic. Okay, so if you're doing some complex side-by-side ATV plastics, right? And you're wrapping that, or maybe you want to wrap a kayak or a snowmobile or a porta-john for even for sake. But that's where that 3951 HT comes in. That HT adhesive is really tailored to the low surface energy plastic, where the 3954 isn't. The 3954 is actually priced a little less than the 3951 HT, but it's perfectly designed for those textured surfaces, if that makes sense. Where
Okay.
3951 HT would work fine on those surfaces as well. It's just a little bit overkill in terms of the adhesive, and you're going to pay more for it.
Gotcha. The only other comment we had was somebody was out of Portland, Oregon area was asking for some samples. So we'll get that taken care of.
Okay.
So another question just popped in. It said, would like to know about vehicle paint time frame to apply a graphics.
I'll say, so I'm assuming they're asking about if it was a freshly painted vehicle.
Yeah, a newly painted vehicle that's going
Okay.
to have graphics applied to it.
Yeah, so thankfully we have a lot of experience with this as well. We partner with Andretti Autosport, who has quick turnaround times. So if the vehicle has been painted and baked, that's the key. If it's been baked, then typically, a couple days, it should be fine. Again, there's a lot of different paints, and there's a lot of different paint techniques out there. So if it's a DIY paint job, or if it's from Mako, or something like that, I would err on the side of waiting like a month or two just to be a lot safer. It really depends on the paint and the variables in place.
Right.
So
somebody's asking, do you have a matte or satin laminate that won't gloss when heated?
good question. I
Good
like
question.
that one. I really like that one. So again, a lot of the feedback, because there's a lot of torch installers out there, mobile installers, you guys are using a lot of torches. We get a lot of actually really good feedback that it's not completely impossible, but our Oragard 290 matte and Oragard 215, they will not gloss as quickly with direct flame torch applications, excuse me, than compared to our competitors' laminates. So something we do in our manufacturing process allows our matte finishes not to gloss up as quickly with those heat applications. So I challenge anybody on this call to actually, get some swatches of our laminate right next to our competitors' laminates, and maybe come back to us and let us know what your experience was. But that's what we hear from a lot of vehicle wrap mobile installers. But that would hold true here with the same laminate that's used on these vehicle wrap applications and these textured wall surface applications. And that's Oragard 290 matte.
Hey, the question that came in earlier about applying to that product we weren't totally familiar with, the EIFS siding.
Okay.
They're saying it's more of a faux stucco.
Oh, okay. So one thing to know on those faux surfaces, and usually those are lighter weight, and the reason they use those is because they're easier to manage on a construction site, and they're not as heavy as the real thing. So if it's a faux, brick or stucco or whatever that is, and it's kind of a foam injection. Again, I don't know if that's what it is, but a lot of our demo pieces are actually constructed out of those faux materials. It'll adhere fine, but the one thing that won't happen is a clean removal. It'll rip that faux surface off down to the foam or whatever that, underlying surface is potentially. So if that's the same thing, I think it is, but keep that in mind. It'll adhere, but removal is the suspect thing.
Okay.
Anything else?
Let me look real quick. I think that may be the last question that has popped in.
Okay.
Yep, that is it so far, Josh.
Okay. Well, great.
Well, I mean, from, Tube Light Denko, we'd like to thank everybody for joining today. And we'd like to give a special thanks to Josh and Beth from Orafol for a great presentation today. We had a lot of good questions, and I think you guys had some great answers.
Yeah, and we'll get you all these resources here shortly, and hopefully you guys can disseminate those out to the group here shortly after that. But I appreciate you guys inviting me on today, and hope we get to do this again, and we'll pick another cool topic for you guys to dive into.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again,
guys.
Josh. Yep. And thanks everybody for joining.
Bye.
See you guys.
Thank you.